Hey guys, with race week just about a week away, a little less actually, I wanted to cover a few of the items that you probably have questions on, or somebody does. With nearly 1,000 drivers, there's a lot to absorb, and a lot of rules, and a lot of things that could potentially get confusing. So I'm going to try to clear some of them up one topic at a time. So the first one I want to talk about is splits and grids for our races. So as you may have guessed by now, this is not an arrive and drive series. So you don't show up on race day, put in a qualifying time, and get gridded that way. We don't grid by iRating. No, you've got to earn it throughout the week. Matter of fact, there is no qualifying on race day. So you won't, when you show up on race day, you're already going to have your grid spot assigned to you, provided that you have made the grid. So let's talk about that first. What are the qualifications to being grid for a major series race? Okay, well, number one, be a major series member. So if you haven't yet signed up, please do so. Go to pacificmajors.com and register for the series. You also have to register for the race. Now, the reason that we register for both the series and for the races is we want to have a reasonable idea of how many people are going to be participating week in and week out. It's a long season, number one. Number two, we race a lot of different disciplines, and I understand fully that some people are only going to race oval, or some people are only going to race road, or some people are even more selective than that. And that's okay. We're going to try to encourage you to race as often as possible. I'm going to try to get you out of your comfort zone and into the car. But having said that, we realize that there is going to be people that just want to have a good time in a professionally organized series on a one-off race that they enjoy, and that's fine. So you register for the series, but you also have to register for the race so that we know that you're planning to race in that event. So those are the first two steps. Step number three is race week. Okay, so our races, I consider them events more than races, and I consider the whole experience of the week lead up and even beyond, honestly, as part of the event. You know, whether it's working with your teammates on a setup or your paint schemes or whatever, I would consider it all part of the event. But the race week is when it really kicks off, and that's the Sunday prior to the race. So 1 week ahead of time, race week begins, and from that day for the next 7, there are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, practice sessions available to you in the league area of iRacing. And in those practice sessions, you must complete at least 30 laps around Daytona for this first race. Each race will have a different requirement, but it will roughly equate to 45 minutes of practice. Now, I think that's insanely too low. I think that is not nearly enough practice, and I would hope that nobody does only those 45 minutes in our official sessions and thinks they're prepared for the race. But that's our minimum in our sessions that you must complete to be eligible to race. If you do not complete those 30 laps in the race week coming up next week, you will not be placed on a grid. It's that simple. Okay, so that's your third criteria to being grid. The fourth criteria is a valid qualifying time. Now, qualifying sessions will run 6 times a day, every 4 hours during race week, and you can qualify up to twice. Okay, I really want to clarify this though, so there's not any confusion. If you qualify a first time and you set a time that's good, I would stand on it. If you attempt a second go and it is worse than your first attempt, you keep the second one. Okay. If you make a second attempt and it's better than your first one, you keep the second one. So in any case, you keep the second attempt, you forego your first attempt. Now, one reason that I would caution against doing that, if you set a valid time in the first attempt, is you must set a valid time. So if you set a valid time in the first attempt and in the second attempt you go out there and you're not faster and you don't actually set a valid time, meaning you have some off tracks or whatever the case may be, and there's no time put up, that is your time for the week. Okay, you don't get to revert back to your first attempt. And if you have a no time, you don't have a qualifying time. And if you don't have a qualifying time, you cannot be grid for the race. Okay, so very important that you get a valid qualifying time in the 8 laps. Now, the real reason that the second qualifying attempt is allowed is so that somebody who has a poor first qualifying attempt, or maybe they qualify early in the week before they're really ready, and they don't get a valid time in, they're able to sort of get themselves more acclimated to the race and to the track, and hopefully put in a time with a valid lap. So that's your fourth criteria: is you must have a valid qualifying time put down at some point during the week. And again, those sessions run through Saturday. A lot of people wait till the end of the week to put in their time, but again, I wouldn't wait too long, because we've had multiple times in the past where people have said, I'm just going to qualify on Saturday before the race, and something comes up, right? Family emergency, work situation, they forget, who knows what, and come to the end of the day and all the qualifying sessions are done and they haven't made an attempt. And they'd still like to race, because maybe they put in hundreds of laps of practice, and maybe they've really worked with their teammates on a setup, but they'd really like to race. And the answer is no. You have to put in a qualifying time. So you have to have a valid time. You must meet the minimum 30 laps. You must register for both the series and the race. Okay, those are your 4 basic requirements to being grid on race day Sunday. Okay, now, last requirement to being grid on race day Sunday is that your time, your qualifying time, must be within 107% of the pole sitter in your class in the very last split of the race. So if there's 3 splits, you've got to be within 107% of the pole sitter in that split. Okay. If there are 2 splits and you're 110% of the pole sitter in the second split, unfortunately, you'll not be grid. It'll be considered a safety issue. And again, we're looking for prepared drivers. We're looking for drivers who are going to be able to get around here. Not necessarily fast. That's not what we're asking. We're saying in a reasonable speed, in a safe manner. And we want to protect the integrity of the race for all drivers. Okay, so again, worst case scenario is you got to be at least 107% of pole sitter in your class in the last split of the race. Now, if you would like to make the pro split or the top split in any region, you've got to be within 104% of the pole sitter in your class. Okay, so even if that makes the pro split slightly smaller, it'll be more competitive, and somebody who might have been, trailing along at the back end of that field, in an uncompetitive race, will get to be backed up into the first split, or the second split, I should say, and hopefully in a more competitive environment. So that's how you would make any of the splits. Now, the top split or the pro split does have an extra caveat in that 75% of those grid spots are reserved for season pass holders. And that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, we would like to encourage you to become a season pass holder, so it comes with that provision. And number two, season pass holders are by definition more committed to the series, and therefore are more involved in a points race. And so points race lasts more than one race, and we want to protect the integrity of the points race throughout the whole season. And so it's important to us that we don't have an individual race that is flooded by one and doneers, ringers, whatever you want to call them, that come in and take all of the spots in the pro split. Now, I don't think that would happen anyway. We have talented drivers and they work hard throughout the week. But again, we got talented drivers throughout the service, and you got people that may be a specialist in a particular car who only want to race one race and aren't, and as such don't necessarily want to purchase a season pass. That's fine. But again, we want to protect the integrity of the points championship, and so that's how we do that, is by reserving 75%. Now, if there aren't enough season pass holders to fill that quota of 75% because they either didn't sign up or because they didn't meet the 104% rule, then those spots will be given up to anybody who does meet that criteria. But again, going into it, expect that that's how that works. Okay, so all of those things add up to how you get in the race, how you are grid for the race. Now, again, come race day in the major series is kind of cool, in my opinion, special in that when you drop in to the practice session, which will open up 2 hours before the race, you're in your split. Okay, so you're in a practice session with your guys, with your drivers. Your pre-grid, when you're practicing, the pit stall that you're in is the pit stall you will have for the entire evening. So you can practice your stops, you can practice where you're at. It remains consistent throughout. There's no qualifying that has happened already, and you're good to go. So, but again, if you don't meet those criteria that we talked about, registering for the series, registering for the race, meeting your minimum laps in practice, putting down a valid qualifying time, if you don't do those things, you will not be placed on a grid for Sunday. So don't show up on race day wondering why you can't get in, or asking, where's the password? What's the password? No passwords to major series races. All you have to do is show up. Your split will be the only one you can get into, the one you're assigned to. So anyway, hope that clears some things up for you. If you have questions, feel free to ask on Facebook or Twitter or Discord, where everybody else can see, and maybe they have the same question. Thanks.